A young woman boards a first-class flight, her quiet confidence hinting at a remarkable story of brilliance and achievement. Yet, a flight attendant, blinded by outdated biases, decides she doesn't belong. What unfolds next is a series of events no one on board could have ever predicted. Within minutes, the truth about her identity shatters every preconceived notion, leaving the airline and its policies forever changed. What happens when injustice meets undeniable brilliance? This is a powerful story of resilience, redemption, and the transformative power of accountability. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you're inspired by stories about justice and triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales. Your support allows us to keep sharing impactful stories like this. Now, let's get into it. The terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport buzzed with the chaotic energy of an early morning rush. Travelers with rolling suitcases zigzagged past Olivia Reynolds, who paused for a moment, centering herself with a deep breath. The announcement for Flight 223 to San Francisco echoed over the loudspeaker, and Olivia adjusted the strap of her well-worn backpack. At 22, she was no stranger to airports, but today felt different. This flight wasn't just a journey, it was the beginning of something monumental. Olivia blended into the sea of faces, yet she couldn't help but notice the occasional glance in her direction. She had become adept at recognizing that look, a fleeting assessment, as if her presence in first class needed an explanation. It didn't faze her anymore. If anything, it fueled her resolve. She was here on a mission, and nothing, not even the weight of others' assumptions, was going to deter her. As she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, Olivia replayed her conversation from a month ago. Sitting in the corner office of Legacy Airlines CEO Mr. Harrison Hayes had been both intimidating and exhilarating. Mr. Hayes was a legend in the aviation industry, a former Air Force pilot turned corporate titan. His office was a museum of his achievements, from framed medals to black and white photos of him beside vintage aircraft. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. Yet for all his accolades, he had listened to her with genuine interest. "I've read about your work," Mr. Hayes had said, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of experience. "Access Fly isn't just an app. It's a vision of what this industry could be, and I want you to help us get there." Olivia had nodded, trying to mask her nerves. "I'm ready for the challenge, sir." He leaned back, his gaze sharp but kind. "Good. You'll fly as an ordinary passenger. No special treatment. I need you to observe everything. The service, the crew, the way passengers are treated, especially those who might face bias. Tell me what we're doing right, and more importantly, what we're not. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. I won't let you down." As Olivia stepped onto the jet bridge, the memory gave her confidence. She was determined to make an impact, not just for herself, but for the passengers who relied on airlines like Legacy to treat them with dignity and respect. The first-class cabin was a symphony of quiet luxury. Plush leather seats gleamed under soft overhead lighting, the muted tones exuding understated elegance. Olivia slid her backpack into the overhead bin, catching the faint scent of coffee mingling with the crisp chill of air conditioning. Settling into her window seat, she opened her notebook, the blank page beckoning her observations. She had barely begun to write when a shadow fell over her. Looking up, she met the sharp gaze of a blonde flight attendant whose uniform was immaculate, down to the crisp fold of her scarf. The name tag on her chest read, Brenda Miller. Brenda's lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes lingered on Olivia for a moment too long, the scrutiny thinly veiled. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" Brenda's tone was courteous but cool. "Just water, please," Olivia replied, her own voice steady and neutral. Brenda nodded, but didn't move immediately. Olivia felt her chest tighten under the weight of that gaze, but she refused to show it. Instead, she offered a faint smile and returned her focus to her notebook. Moments later, Brenda walked away, her heels clicking against the floor in sharp, measured steps. Olivia jotted down her first impressions, noting the pristine cabin, the efficient boarding process, and the subtle but palpable undercurrent of tension she felt. It wasn't Brenda's words that had unsettled her, but the unspoken judgment behind them, a familiar echo of the barriers Olivia had faced before. Unbeknownst to Olivia, Mr. Harrison Hayes was at the airport that morning, observing her from afar. Standing near the boarding gate with his assistant, he watched as she navigated the process with quiet determination. "She's impressive," Mr. Hayes said, his eyes following her as she disappeared down the jet bridge. "She is." Ethan, his assistant, glanced up from his tablet. "If they do, we'll know this isn't just a test for Olivia. It's a test for all of us." Mr. Hayes's expression hardened. As the plane began taxiing to the runway, Olivia took a moment to relax. She gazed out the window, watching as the morning sun cast golden hues across the tarmac. She thought about her parents, who had worked tirelessly to support her dreams, and about the countless others who never got the opportunities she now had. This wasn't just about proving herself. It was about paving the way for those who would come after her. The engines roared to life, and the plane surged forward, lifting off into the clear blue sky. Olivia let out a slow breath, her fingers brushing the pages of her notebook. She had no idea that this flight, meant to be a quiet observation, was about to turn into the most defining moment of her life. Brenda Miller smoothed the hem of her blazer, her fingers lingering briefly over the golden wings pinned to her lapel. 35 years of service had made her routine seamless, her every action deliberate and precise. Yet today, as she prepared for another flight, she felt a weight she couldn't quite name. The first-class cabin was quiet except for the low murmur of boarding passengers and the rhythmic hum of the plane's engines. Brenda stood at the front, clipboard in hand, scanning the rows of plush leather seats. "For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." She had spent decades mastering the art of subtle observation, ensuring no detail escaped her attention. To her, the cabin wasn't just a space, it was a stage. But lately it felt like the script was changing, and she wasn't sure she liked the new lines. Her gaze lingered on the polished surfaces and soft lighting of first class, a faint smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. She couldn't help but think back to her first flight. The year was 1988, and everything had felt magical. An era where passengers donned their finest clothes, meals came with silverware, and flight attendants like her were symbols of elegance. She had stepped into the role with a sense of pride, following in the footsteps of her mother, a pioneer among the early waves of female flight attendants. Her mother had often said, "This uniform isn't just a job, it's a badge of honor." Brenda had carried that belief with her, wearing it as a shield against turbulence, both in the air and in life. But the industry had changed. Diversity training sessions, budget airline competitors, and an increasing push for inclusivity made her feel like the airline she loved was slipping through her fingers. She respected progress in theory, but it was hard not to feel like tradition was being traded for something unfamiliar. As she made her way down the aisle, Brenda's eyes landed on a young black woman seated by the window. Something about her presence seemed out of place. The girl's demeanor was composed, her posture confident. Brenda noted her simple but polished outfit and the notebook on her lap. Her manifest confirmed the name Olivia Reynolds. There was no reason for suspicion. Olivia's ticket had checked out just like everyone else's, but Brenda couldn't shake the sense that she needed to keep a closer eye on her. Forcing a practiced smile, Brenda approached. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off?" The girl looked up, her expression calm but guarded. "Just water, please," she said with a polite nod. Brenda nodded in return, but her eyes lingered a moment too long. Turning away, she walked back to the galley, the clicking of her heels punctuating her thoughts. She told herself her hesitation wasn't personal, it was just her job to notice things. Standards had to be upheld. That was all. Behind her, Olivia let out a slow breath and returned to her notebook. She had felt the scrutiny before Brenda even spoke, a sensation as familiar as the hum of the plane beneath her. Olivia was used to moments like these, subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Her notebook became a sanctuary, the smooth glide of her pen grounding her. On the page she wrote first interaction, courteous but veiled hostility. Worth noting. Olivia had learned to channel moments like this into determination. It was a skill honed from years of navigating spaces where she wasn't expected, or worse, wasn't welcome. She'd faced worse than a lingering stare or a clipped tone. This was part of her mission, to observe, document, and remain unshaken. Brenda poured the water slowly, her movements mechanical. She glanced at the small portal window, where the morning light bathed the wing of the plane in soft gold. Her reflection stared back, and for a brief moment doubt flickered in her eyes. Was she being too critical? Was she letting her unease cloud her judgment? She dismissed the thought with a shake of her head. Protocol, she reminded herself. This was about protocol. Returning to Olivia, Brenda placed the glass of water on the tray table with a practiced grace. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, her voice measured. "Thank you," Olivia replied evenly, her tone revealing nothing. She watched as Brenda walked away, her sharp movements betraying an underlying tension. From her seat, Olivia gazed out the window, letting the soft hum of the engines fill the silence. Her mind drifted briefly to her parents, whose sacrifices had paved her way to this moment. She thought of their unwavering belief in her potential, their constant reminder that she belonged wherever she chose to be. She straightened her spine as if carrying their encouragement with her. Brenda returned to her station at the front of the cabin. Her clipboard now held a little tighter. She glanced at the rows of passengers, but her thoughts remained fixed on Olivia. The young woman was polite, reserved, and yet something about her presence felt disruptive. Not in an overt way, but in the quiet way change often did, gradually, persistently, and unmistakably. The engines roared to life, and the plane began to taxi toward the runway. Brenda braced herself, the familiar rhythm of takeoff grounding her nerves. But deep down she knew this flight was going to be different. Olivia wasn't just another passenger. She was a reminder of everything Brenda had spent her career trying to reconcile. A world that was moving forward, whether she was ready or not. As the plane lifted into the sky, the morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the cabin in hues of gold and silver. For a brief moment, Brenda allowed herself to relax, the routine taking over, but a voice in the back of her mind whispered that this wasn't just another day. This flight, this passenger, this moment, it was the start of something she couldn't yet define. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. And she wasn't wrong. The cabin hummed with the steady rhythm of engines, a subtle vibration that seemed to settle into the air itself. Olivia Reynolds felt the weight of it, not just the sound, but the atmosphere. She sat quietly, her pen moving across the notebook on her lap in slow, deliberate strokes. Each word she wrote sharpened her focus, grounding her in the moment. As she catalogued every detail of her experience, around her, passengers shuffled in their seats, flight attendants moved with practiced precision, and the plane settled into a rhythm Olivia found strangely soothing. Her earlier interaction with Brenda lingered in her mind. There had been nothing overt in the flight attendant's demeanour. No harsh words, no pointed remarks. Yet, Olivia recognised the subtle shift in tone, the faint edge to Brenda's smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a look Olivia had encountered before, one that questioned rather than welcomed. She knew better than to react. Her role here wasn't to confront, but to observe, to document everything with the detached clarity the situation demanded. Still, there was no mistaking the tension, no matter how much Olivia tried to set it aside. Across the aisle, an older woman adjusted her scarf, the faint rustle of fabric catching Olivia's attention. The woman's silver hair gleamed under the soft cabin lights, her posture upright but relaxed. Ellie. Porter had been watching Olivia since the young woman first stepped onto the plane. There was something about her, a quiet resilience, a strength that Ellie recognized instantly. It wasn't in her words or actions, but in the way she carried herself, the way she calmly navigated the subtle undercurrents of the cabin. Ellie shifted in her seat, a faint creak of leather accompanying her movement. Memories stirred, vivid and unbidden, as she watched Olivia jot notes into her notebook. Ellie had been that young woman once, seated in spaces where her presence felt more like a challenge than a right. The flight attendants had worn uniforms just like Brenda's, their polite smiles often masking something far colder. Ellie had learned to navigate those moments with the same grace Olivia now displayed. It was a skill honed by necessity, one that carried the weight of survival. Brenda passed by, her movements brisk and precise as she made her rounds through the cabin. Her eyes flicked toward Olivia's notebook, her curiosity unmistakable. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her polished exterior betraying the briefest hint of unease. Brenda told herself it wasn't personal. It was protocol. She was simply doing her job. But even as she moved on, her thoughts lingered on the young woman in seat 3A. Something about her felt disruptive, though Brenda couldn't quite place why. Olivia didn't look up as Brenda walked away, but her pen moved with renewed purpose. She wrote another line, her grip tightening slightly on the page. Behavior suggests heightened scrutiny. Perception of outsider status. The words felt clinical, detached, but they carried the weight of her frustration, carefully controlled and channeled into her work. Olivia had faced moments like this before, and each time she reminded herself why she was here, not to react, but to create change. Ellie continued to observe, her thoughts pulling her back to a time when her own presence in a cabin like this had been met with open hostility. She remembered her first flight as a newly hired attendant, her uniform pressed to perfection, her nerves barely contained beneath her professional smile. Passengers had stared openly, some whispering, others refusing to meet her gaze at all. Once a man had demanded she be removed from the flight entirely, his voice loud and unapologetic as he cited his discomfort. The airline had complied without hesitation, and Ellie had been reassigned to desk duty for weeks. She glanced at Brenda, the polished veneer of professionalism hiding something Ellie recognized from those earlier years. The look, the posture, the tightness in her smile. They all spoke of a discomfort that had nothing to do with policy or protocol. Ellie sighed quietly, a pang of sympathy mingling with her frustration. She had seen it before, and she knew where it could lead. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Brenda returned to Olivia's row. Her voice was calm but firm as she said, "Miss, I'll need to check your ticket again." Olivia's head lifted slowly, her expression neutral. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone measured. "For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." "Just a routine check," Brenda replied, her hand already extended. The cabin fell quiet, the subtle hum of conversation fading as passengers turned their attention to the interaction across the aisle. Ellie's back straightened, her sharp gaze fixed on the scene. Olivia handed over her boarding pass without a word, her calm demeanour unwavering even as Brenda examined the document with meticulous care. The seconds stretched uncomfortably before Brenda handed the ticket back with a clipped, "Thank you." She turned and walked away, but the moment lingered, heavy and unspoken. Olivia exhaled quietly, her composure intact but her mind racing. She made another note in her book: escalation, further scrutiny, unnecessary, observations to be continued. Ellie leaned slightly toward the woman beside her, her voice low but firm. "She reminds me of someone I used to be," Ellie said, her words weighted with both pride and sorrow. The younger woman glanced at Olivia, then back at Ellie. "Do you think it's intentional?" she asked hesitantly. "It doesn't have to be intentional to have an impact," Ellie replied, her tone steady but reflective. The cabin settled back into its rhythm, but the tension lingered like static in the air. Olivia returned to her notebook, her pen moving once again in deliberate strokes. Across the aisle, Ellie watched her for a moment longer before leaning back in her seat. She didn't need to intervene, not yet. But if this continued, she knew she wouldn't stay silent. Brenda, now back at the galley, busied herself with inventory checks, her movements mechanical. She stared out the small portal window at the clouds beyond, her reflection staring back at her. For a fleeting second, doubt flickered in her mind. Was she being thorough, or something else entirely? The thought was dismissed as quickly as it came. Protocol, she reminded herself. It was just protocol. And yet, as she turned back to face the cabin, she couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was going to challenge her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Brenda stepped out from the galley, her movements sharp and purposeful as she returned to the cabin. The air felt heavier now, as if tension had seeped into the very walls. Olivia Reynolds kept her composure, her hands resting lightly on the open notebook in her lap. She noticed Brenda's brisk steps and the tightness in her expression, sensing the shift before it even reached her row. She had sensed this moment building, each interaction with Brenda Miller adding to the weight pressing against her. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a slight hesitation in tone, but now it was undeniable. Brenda returned to the first-class cabin, her steps measured but sharp, as if she were determined to make her presence known. Her gaze locked on Olivia, and the faint smile she had worn earlier was nowhere to be seen. "Miss Reynolds," Brenda said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the engines, "I need to see your ticket again." Olivia looked up slowly, her expression calm but questioning. Around her, conversations in the cabin faltered, and passengers began to take notice. The silence spread like ripples in still water. "I've already shown you my ticket," Olivia replied, her tone steady. "Is there a reason you need to check it again?" "It's just a routine verification," Brenda said, though her clipped tone betrayed her impatience. Olivia held Brenda's gaze, her fingers tightening around her notebook. The moment stretched uncomfortably as Brenda waited, her hand outstretched. Olivia reached into her bag, pulling out the boarding pass she had already presented hours ago. She handed it over without a word, her calm demeanour unwavering. Brenda studied the ticket as if searching for a flaw. The seconds ticked by, each one amplifying the tension in the cabin. Olivia could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her now, some curious, others uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Ellie Porter straightened in her seat, a sharp gaze fixed on Brenda. Finally, Brenda handed the ticket back. "Thank you," she said curtly, as if her scrutiny had been justified. But Olivia wasn't done. Folding her ticket neatly, she placed it back in her bag and looked directly at Brenda. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" Brenda blinked momentarily, caught off guard. "No," she replied, her tone faltering slightly. "That will be all." She turned and walked toward the galley, her shoulders stiff with tension. Behind her, the cabin seemed to exhale collectively, the unspoken discomfort lingering in the air. Olivia glanced at her notebook, jotting down a single line. Escalation intentional? Targeting confirmed. Across the aisle, Ellie could no longer stay silent. She leaned slightly toward the woman beside her, her voice low but steady. "This isn't the first time I've seen something like this," she said, her words heavy with memory. The younger woman glanced at Ellie, her brow furrowed. "Do you think she's doing it on purpose?" Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line. "It doesn't have to be intentional to cause harm," she replied, her voice tinged with both frustration and sadness. Ellie watched as Brenda moved through the galley, her precise movements betraying the tension in her posture. Memories flooded back, unbidden, moments from her early years as a flight attendant, when passengers would refuse to meet her eyes, or worse, refuse her service altogether. She had learned to navigate those moments with grace, to smile through the sting of their words and actions, but the pain of those encounters had never left her. Ellie's gaze returned to Olivia, the young woman's quiet strength a mirror of her own in those early days. She felt a pang of both pride and sorrow. Times had changed, but not enough. The next escalation came minutes later. Brenda returned, this time holding a service card. She stopped at Olivia's row, her expression unreadable. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice clipped. Olivia looked up, her calm exterior never wavering. "Just water, thank you." Brenda poured the water with deliberate slowness, placing the glass on Olivia's tray table with a soft clink. But as she turned to leave, she paused, her eyes flicking toward the notebook on Olivia's lap. "Working on something important?" Brenda asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Olivia met her gaze evenly. "Just notes," she replied simply. Brenda hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line before she turned and walked away. Olivia watched her go, her pen hovering over the page. She wrote another line, "Hostility escalating." Additional note, "Passengers observing." Across the aisle, Ellie had seen enough. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her movements deliberate. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as passengers turned to watch. Ellie stepped into the aisle, her presence commanding despite her age. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and steady, "but I think we all need to pause for a moment and ask ourselves what we're witnessing here. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." Brenda turned, her face pale with surprise. "Ma'am, is there something I can assist you with?" Ellie's gaze was unwavering. "No, I think it's you who might need assistance. This young woman has shown her ticket, complied with your requests, and yet you continue to target her. Can you explain why?" Brenda's mouth opened, then closed. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Ellie continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've seen this before. Decades ago, I was the one being singled out, questioned, and made to feel like I didn't belong. But that was a different time, wasn't it? Or at least, I thought it was." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Some passengers nodded subtly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A businessman near the front raised his phone, the small red light indicating he was recording. Brenda's hands tightened around the handle of the service cart. "Ma'am, I assure you." "Assure me of what?" Ellie interrupted, her tone firm but calm. "That this is just a misunderstanding? Because it doesn't feel that way." Olivia remained seated, her expression composed, but her eyes filled with gratitude as they met Ellie's for the first time since the flight began. She felt less alone. The tension in the cabin was electric, every passenger keenly aware of the dynamic playing out before them. Brenda, visibly flustered, retreated to the galley without another word. Ellie returned to her seat, her movements deliberate and dignified. She exchanged a small nod with Olivia, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity. Olivia picked up her pen, writing the final line of her observation. Support received. Moment of change initiated. As the plane continued its journey, the cabin slowly settled back into an uneasy quiet. But for Olivia, and perhaps for everyone else watching, The weight of the moment lingered. The cabin hummed with the soft vibration of the engines, but the air inside felt heavier than ever, tension lingering in every corner, filling the space between the passengers, quiet murmurs and their sideways glances. Brenda Miller, whose polished professionalism had always been her armor, now felt that armor cracking. She emerged from the galley, her steps brisk but her composure visibly strained, as if each move carried the weight of mounting pressure. Olivia Reynolds, seated calmly in 3A, felt the energy shift the moment Brenda stepped back into the cabin. Brenda's gaze cut through the air, searching for control. But Olivia remained steady. She kept her hands lightly on the closed notebook in her lap, her expression neutral. Around her, the low buzz of whispered conversations barely masked the growing curiosity of her fellow passengers. "Miss Reynolds," Brenda said, her voice sharper than before, the edge betraying her discomfort, "I need to remind you to remain cooperative with the crew." Olivia turned her head slowly, her calm exterior never faltering. She met Brenda's gaze evenly, her voice measured as she replied, "I have been cooperative. I've complied with every request you've made, even the ones that were unnecessary." The words hung in the air, drawing a collective pause. Conversations faded, replaced by a tense, anticipatory silence. A businessman in the front row adjusted his phone subtly, the faint red light of a recording button glowing against his screen. Brenda stiffened, her grip tightening on the edge of the seat beside her. "It's protocol," she insisted, though her voice lacked its usual authority. Olivia's brow lifted slightly, her tone calm but cutting. "Protocol doesn't involve singling out a passenger repeatedly. If there's an actual issue, I'd like you to state it clearly. Otherwise, I'd appreciate the same respect you've shown the other passengers in this cabin." The ripple of murmurs grew louder, some passengers shifting in their seats to watch the exchange unfold more directly. Across the aisle, Ellie Porter leaned forward, her sharp gaze fixed on Brenda. The older woman had stayed silent long enough. "She's right," Ellie said, her voice steady but firm, carrying easily over the hum of the engines. She straightened in her seat, commanding the attention of those around her. "This young woman has done nothing wrong, and yet you've made it your mission to target her. Why is that?" Brenda turned toward Ellie, her face a mix of surprise and irritation. "Ma'am, this isn't your concern." "Oh, it absolutely is my concern," Ellie interrupted, her words cutting through the rising tension. Her gaze didn't waver as she continued, her voice calm but laden with authority. "I've seen this kind of behavior before. Decades ago, I was the one being singled out, questioned, and made to feel like I didn't belong. And let me tell you something, it doesn't end well for anyone involved." Passengers exchanged glances, their curiosity now tinged with unease. A younger woman near the window glanced at Olivia, then at Ellie, before giving Olivia a faint nod of support, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. The businessman in the front row whispered to the person beside him, his phone still trained on the scene. "This is going viral," he muttered. Brenda faltered, her usual confidence slipping under the weight of so many watchful eyes. She opened her mouth to respond, but her words caught in her throat. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered across her face. Was she truly following protocol, or had she let something else cloud her judgment? She dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it came, but the hesitation was enough for Olivia to seize the moment. "If you have nothing further to say, I think we're done here," Olivia said, her voice steady but firm. "Unless, of course, there's an actual issue you'd like to address." The calm power in her tone sent another ripple through the cabin. "For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line as she straightened her posture. "I'll need to speak with the captain," she said abruptly, turning on her heel and walking away. Ellie let out a soft sigh as she leaned back in her seat. "She's scrambling now," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Olivia offered a faint smile. She knows she's being recorded, her tone measured but tinged with quiet satisfaction, and she knows she's wrong. In the minutes that followed, the tension shifted. Passengers whispered among themselves, some clearly unsettled, others supportive. The businessman in the front row uploaded the video to a popular social media platform, his caption reading, "First-class passenger unfairly targeted by flight crew. This needs attention." Notifications began buzzing on phones as the video gained traction. Though most passengers remained unaware of its rapid spread, Ellie leaned toward Olivia, her voice low but warm. "You handled that well," she said. "Better than I would have at your age." Olivia smiled faintly. "I've had practice," she replied simply. Ellie nodded knowingly. "Practice doesn't make it easier, though." "No," Olivia agreed, "but it does make you stronger." The intercom crackled to life, interrupting their quiet conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're aware of some concerns in the cabin and want to assure you that we're committed to ensuring a pleasant experience for all passengers. Thank you for your patience." Olivia's grip on her notebook tightened slightly. The captain's message was vague, but it carried an unspoken acknowledgement of the situation. She glanced at Ellie, who gave her a reassuring nod. Brenda returned shortly after, her expression subdued, her steps slower than before. She stopped a few feet from Olivia's when she finally spoke. Her voice was quieter, almost reluctant. "Miss Reynolds," she began, "I'd like to apologize if I've caused you any discomfort." The words were stiff, but they were there. Olivia tilted her head slightly, studying Brenda for a moment before replying. "Thank you," she said, her tone neutral. The apology hung awkwardly in the air before Brenda turned and walked back to the galley, her shoulders visibly tense. Olivia exhaled slowly, her composure unbroken. Across the aisle, Ellie watched her with a faint smile. 7 minutes, Ellie said softly. That's all it took to remind her who's really in charge. Olivia allowed herself a small smile in return. "It wasn't just me," Olivia said quietly. Ellie's gaze softened. "No, it wasn't. But you carried yourself like it was." The hum of the engine seemed louder now, an almost tangible presence pressing against the tension in the cabin. Olivia Reynolds sat quietly in her seat, her hands resting lightly on her notebook. The earlier confrontation with Brenda Miller had left ripples of unease among the passengers. Some whispered to one another, their glances flicking between Olivia and the galley, while others remained focused on their devices, their faces illuminated by the glow of their screens. Olivia felt the weight of their attention, but she maintained her composure. Across the aisle, Ellie Porter's steady gaze offered a sense of reassurance, a silent reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. In the galley, Brenda leaned heavily against the counter, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. The professional veneer she had worn so carefully for decades was cracking under the strain. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, the calm yet cutting power of Olivia's words, the passengers' murmurs of disapproval. For the first time, Brenda felt an unfamiliar doubt creeping into her thoughts. Had she crossed a line? Was her sense of protocol just an excuse to mask something deeper? She shook her head, trying to dispel the unsettling questions. Protocol, she reminded herself again, though the word felt hollow now. The murmur of voices in the cabin grew louder, a ripple of movement breaking the usual stillness of a flight in progress. Brenda glanced toward the aisle and froze. Stepping into the cabin was a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. His silver hair and crisp suit marked him as someone of authority, and the two airline officials flanking him left no doubt as to who he was. Harrison Hayes, CEO of Legacy Airlines, had entered the scene. Mr. Hayes paused at the front of the cabin, his sharp eyes scanning the rows of passengers. His gaze lingered on Olivia, whose calm demeanor had not wavered despite the tension surrounding her. Then his eyes shifted to Brenda, who stood stiffly near the galley, her pale face betraying her internal struggle. The hum of the engines filled the silence as Mr. Hayes stepped further into the cabin. "Good afternoon," Mr. Hayes began, his voice steady and composed. "I've been made aware of an incident on this flight, and I'd like to address it directly." The cabin steeled. Passengers sat upright, their attention fixed on Mr. Hayes. Brenda's hands tightened around her clipboard, her breathing shallow as she prepared for the scrutiny she knew was coming. Mr. Hayes turned to her first. "Miss Miller, would you care to explain what's been happening here?" Mr. Hayes asked. Brenda hesitated, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. "Sir?" Her voice faltered, and she glanced at the passengers, all of whom were now watching her intently. "I was following protocol, ensuring all passengers complied with our guidelines." His expression remained neutral, but there was a sharpness in his tone as he replied, "And do those guidelines involve repeatedly questioning a passenger who has already complied? Because from what I've observed and what's currently circulating online, it seems there may have been a misjudgment on your part." Brenda's throat tightened, and she struggled to find her voice. "It wasn't intentional, sir," she said weakly. "I was just trying to." "To what?" Mr. Hayes interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "To ensure that Miss Reynolds felt unwelcome, because that's certainly the impression I'm getting. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." Olivia, who had been silent until now, straightened in her seat, her voice clear and steady as she spoke. "I boarded this flight with the same expectations as any other passenger, to be treated with respect and professionalism. Instead, I've been questioned repeatedly and made to feel like I don't belong here. I complied with every request, yet it became clear that this wasn't about protocol, it was personal." Her words landed with quiet power, the weight of a truth resonating in the silence that followed. Mr. Hayes nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you for sharing that, Miss Reynolds. On behalf of Legacy Airlines, I want to apologize for the experience you've had today. This is not how we treat our passengers, and it's not reflective of the values we stand for." Before Mr. Hayes could continue, Ellie stood from her seat, her movements deliberate and composed. She stepped into the aisle, her presence commanding without effort. "If I may," Mr. Hayes gestured for her to proceed, his respect evident in the slight incline of his head. Ellie turned, addressing the cabin as much as she addressed Mr. Hayes. "I worked in this industry for over 3 decades, she began. "I've seen progress, yes, but I've also seen how easy it is for old habits to linger, for biases to resurface when we least expect them. What happened here today isn't just about 1 passenger or 1 flight. It's about ensuring that no one is ever made to feel less than simply because of who they are." Her words hung in the air, a powerful reminder of the long road to progress. Brenda's eyes dropped to the floor, Ellie's words cutting through her defenses with a precision she couldn't ignore. Ellie turned to Mr. Hayes, her voice softening but retaining its strength. "Change doesn't come easily, Mr. Hayes. It requires vigilance, reflection, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Today is an opportunity to reaffirm the values this airline stands for." Mr. Hayes nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Porter. Your insight is invaluable, and your contributions to this industry are deeply respected." Mr. Hayes turned back to Brenda, his tone firm but not unkind. "Miss Miller, I trust you understand the gravity of this situation. This isn't just about today. It's about the trust our passengers place in us and the integrity we must uphold. There will be a full investigation into this matter, and appropriate actions will be taken." Brenda nodded, her voice barely a whisper as she replied, "Yes, sir." Mr. Hayes straightened, addressing the cabin at large. "To everyone here, let me assure you that Legacy Airlines is committed to fairness, equality, and respect for all our passengers. What has happened today is not acceptable, and we will ensure that steps are taken to prevent incidents like this in the future." The cabin erupted into a low murmur of approval. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding, others quietly expressing their satisfaction. The businessman in the front row lowered his phone, a faint smile of vindication on his face as Mr. Hayes and his team exited the cabin. The atmosphere began to shift. The heavy tension that had gripped the space started to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of resolution. Brenda retreated to the galley, her steps heavy with the weight of reflection. Leaning against the counter, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, her mind churning with the gravity of what had just unfolded. Back in her seat, Olivia exhaled slowly, her composure giving way to a quiet sense of triumph. Ellie leaned toward her. "You handled that beautifully," she said, her voice soft but firm. Olivia smiled faintly. "I had help." Ellie returned the smile, her eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and understanding. "We all need help sometimes." The jet touched down smoothly, its wheels rolling to a steady halt on the tarmac. Inside the cabin, the tension that had gripped the passengers began to dissipate, replaced by a hushed sense of reflection. Olivia Reynolds closed her notebook, her fingers brushing over its cover as if sealing away the day's events. She glanced at Ellie Porter, seated across the aisle, and found solace in the older woman's calm, knowing smile. It was a reminder that even in moments of confrontation, unity could be found. As the passengers disembarked, Olivia noticed subtle gestures of support. A nod here, a whispered "good job" there, and even a small thumbs up from the businessman who had recorded the earlier exchange. She returned the gestures with a quiet smile, appreciating the solidarity. It wasn't grand or loud, but it was enough to remind her that what had happened on this flight mattered, not just to her, but to everyone who had witnessed it. The atmosphere shifted again when Olivia was escorted to a private meeting room in the airport. She found herself seated at a polished wooden table alongside Ellie and Mr. Harrison Hayes, the two airline officials who flanked Mr. Day. Hayes stood silently, their postures stiff and formal, but Mr. Hayes himself radiated an air of calm authority. His presence was commanding, yet approachable, a delicate balance that immediately put Olivia at ease. "Miss Reynolds," Mr. Hayes began, his voice steady, "I want to start by apologizing again for what you experienced on your flight. Legacy Airlines prides itself on creating an environment of respect and inclusivity, and today we fell short of that standard. You deserved better." Olivia met his gaze, appreciating the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she replied. "But what happened today isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows moments like this to happen, whether intentionally or not." Ellie leaned forward slightly, her presence lending weight to Olivia's words. "She's right," Ellie said, her tone calm but firm. "This isn't an isolated incident. These moments might seem small to some, but they're part of a larger pattern. I've lived through it, and I've seen how it chips away at trust, at progress." Mr. Hayes listened intently, nodding thoughtfully. His expression was one of genuine reflection as he considered their words. "You're both absolutely correct," he said. "That's why I wanted, Miss Reynolds. I've reviewed the notes you were taking during the flight. Your observations are insightful and invaluable. Would you be open to collaborating with us on a project to improve our passenger experience protocols?" Olivia blinked momentarily, surprised. "You want me to help you change the system?" "Yes," Mr. Hayes said with a faint smile. "Your insights could help us create real change. I'd like to offer you a role in developing a new initiative, a program that ensures our crew is better trained to handle diverse passenger needs and addresses unconscious bias." Ellie's voice, warm and steady, broke the brief silence. "That's a good step, but it needs more than just training. It needs accountability and a system that encourages people to reflect and grow." "Agreed," Mr. Hayes replied, his tone decisive. He turned to Ellie, his respect evident in his posture. "Miss Porter, I'd also like to invite you to serve as a special advisor for this initiative. Your experience and perspective would be invaluable." Ellie smiled, her pride evident as she nodded. "I'd be honored to help." While this discussion took place, Brenda Miller sat alone in a small office elsewhere in the airport. The announcement of her temporary suspension still echoed in her mind, each word a sharp reminder of how the day had unraveled. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, her ability to navigate difficult situations with composure. Yet now, faced with the reality of her actions, she could no longer deny the truth. Somewhere along the way, her pride had become a shield, one that blinded her to her own biases. Her thoughts drifted back to Olivia's calm but piercing words, to Ellie's pointed reminder of the past. Brenda closed her eyes, the weight of shame pressing down on her, but amid the regret, she felt a quiet determination stir within her. She didn't want her career to end like this, defined by a failure to uphold the values she believed in. There was work to be done, within herself and for the airline she had served for so long. Weeks passed, and Legacy Airlines began implementing sweeping changes. Mr. Hayes personally spearheaded a comprehensive initiative aimed at fostering inclusivity and addressing unconscious bias across all levels of the organization. Olivia became a key member of the development team, her insights shaping programs that included mandatory training, revamped feedback systems, and a mentorship program for new crew members. Ellie became a beloved figure in this effort, her wisdom and experience inspiring both seasoned and new employees alike. In her first training session, she stood before a room filled with flight attendants, her voice calm but resolute as she shared her story. "When I first started in this industry, people like me weren't even considered for roles like this," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Progress has been made, yes, but progress doesn't sustain itself. It requires effort, reflection, and courage. That's what we're here to do, to build something better together." The room was silent as her words sank in, the weight of her experience and the hope in her voice resonating deeply among the attendees. Brenda was seated quietly in the back row. She had volunteered to attend the session, her presence a gesture of accountability and a small but meaningful step toward growth. As Ellie spoke, Brenda felt the sting of recognition and the spark of possibility, a reminder that change, though difficult, was within reach. 3 months later, Legacy Airlines held a ceremony to celebrate the launch of its new initiative. The event was modest but heartfelt, attended by employees, passengers, and members of the community. Olivia stood beside Mr. Hayes at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about fixing what went wrong," she said. "It's about building something better. A system that ensures dignity, respect, and inclusivity for everyone who steps onto one of our planes." Her words were met with warm applause, a testament to the shared commitment to change. Ellie was honored with a special award for her contributions, the standing ovation leaving her momentarily speechless. In the crowd, Brenda watched quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't ready to step forward yet, but she knew she would in time. For now, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile, recognizing that change wasn't just happening around her, it was beginning within her. Olivia glanced at Ellie, the shared smile a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had accomplished together. In that moment, it was clear that the legacy of change they had helped create was just the beginning. The ripple effects of that flight had grown far beyond the confines of the cabin. What began as a quiet confrontation in the skies was now a catalyst for something much larger. The changes initiated by Legacy Airlines had garnered widespread attention, with media outlets covering the airline's commitment to inclusivity and the faces behind the reform. Olivia Reynolds' name had become synonymous with resilience and progress, her story circulating across platforms and inspiring conversations about equity in the workplace. Olivia, overwhelmed at first, embraced her new role with quiet determination. She had never sought the spotlight, but now that it had found her, she chose to use it to amplify the values she had always stood for. Invitations to speak at conferences and participate in interviews arrived daily. In one particularly memorable interview, she recounted the moment on the plane when Ellie had stood up for her. "For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." "It wasn't just about me," Olivia said. "It was about showing the changes possible, even in the smallest moments, and that unity can rise above division." Her words resonated deeply, sparking a wave of support and admiration. Meanwhile, Ellie Porter found herself equally busy. Legacy Airlines had invited her to lead a series of workshops aimed at bridging generational gaps within the industry. She approached each session with a blend of warmth and candor, sharing stories from her decades in the field. Her anecdotes, laced with humor and hard-earned wisdom, captivated audiences. But it was her emphasis on empathy and accountability that left a lasting impression. During one session, she asked a room full of flight attendants, "What do you want your legacy to be? When people think of you and your work, what do you hope they remember?" The room fell silent as her question hung in the air, inviting introspection and dialogue. Ellie became not just a mentor, but a bridge between the past and the future, ensuring the lessons of her generation were not forgotten. For Brenda Miller, the days following her suspension were a time of reckoning. The shame she had felt on that flight lingered, but it was no longer paralyzing. Instead, it became a motivator. Determined not to let her failure define her, she sought ways to make amends. Brenda began attending Legacy's new training sessions, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to learn. She sat quietly in the back during Ellie's workshops, absorbing every word. In private moments, she reflected on the biases she had long denied and the harm they had caused. Slowly, she began to take steps toward redemption, volunteering for community outreach programs and mentoring junior staff. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instant, but Brenda was committed to the work of rebuilding herself. Harrison Hayes watched these developments with a sense of quiet satisfaction. As CEO, he had faced significant pushback from some quarters. Critics questioned the necessity of the changes, while others dismissed them as performative. Mr. Hayes, however, remained resolute. He knew that true progress required more than words. It demanded action, consistency, and resilience in the face of resistance. Under his guidance, Legacy Airlines rolled out a comprehensive plan to embed inclusivity into its core values. Beyond training programs, the airline introduced new feedback systems that allowed passengers and crew to report incidents confidentially and ensured swift, transparent resolution processes. Mr. Hayes saw these initiatives not as a reaction to a single event, but as a proactive commitment to building a better organization. The journey was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, moments when it seemed easier to maintain the status quo than to fight for change. Yet for Olivia, Ellie, and even Brenda, those moments were opportunities to reaffirm their purpose. Olivia often found herself reflecting on Ellie's question about legacy. For her, the answer was clear. She wanted to be remembered not just for standing up for herself, but for helping to create a system where no one else would have to. Months passed, and the effects of their work began to take root. Olivia's collaboration with Legacy's development team led to the creation of an app designed to collect real-time feedback from passengers, ensuring that every voice was heard. Ellie's workshops became a cornerstone of the airline's culture, mandatory for all employees and highly regarded for their transformative impact. Brenda, once hesitant and defensive, now took an active role in these sessions, sharing her journey of self-awareness and redemption with an honesty that inspired others. In a quiet but significant moment, the three women found themselves together again, this time at a community event hosted by Legacy Airlines. The event celebrated the airline's progress and honored those who had contributed to its transformation. Olivia stood on stage alongside Mr. Hayes, addressing a crowd of employees, passengers, and community leaders. Her words carried the same quiet strength that had defined her from the start. "Change isn't easy," she said, her voice steady. "It requires patience, humility, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it's worth it, because every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to a world where everyone feels seen and valued." The crowd erupted in applause as Olivia stepped back, letting Ellie take her place at the podium. The older woman's presence commanded attention, her smile warm as she began to speak. "What we've done here isn't perfect, and it isn't finished," her voice calm but resolute. "But it's a start, and sometimes a start is all you need to ignite something bigger than yourself." As the applause swelled again, Brenda stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't ready to step into the spotlight, but she didn't need to for now. It was enough to watch, to listen, and to know that she was part of this change, even in a small way. She allowed herself a faint smile, a reflection of the hope she now carried. The evening ended with the three women standing side by side, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Olivia, the catalyst; Ellie, the bridge; Brenda, the learner. Together, they represented what was possible when people chose to confront their flaws, embrace their strengths, and commit to something greater than themselves. The flight that had started it all was long over, but its legacy had only just begun. The changes at Legacy Airlines began to ripple through the organization, subtle at first, but unmistakable. Training sessions, once dismissed as formalities, were now moments of genuine reflection. The staff, from senior crew members to junior hires, approached the sessions with new energy, inspired by the stories shared by Olivia Reynolds, Ellie Porter, and Brenda Miller. What had started as a response to one troubling incident was evolving into a cultural shift, a redefinition of what Legacy Airlines stood for. AccessFly, a tool for real-time passenger feedback, quickly became a cornerstone of this transformation. Initially tested on select flights, it offered passengers a voice they hadn't had before. The data collected was as illuminating as it was daunting, uncovering patterns that both affirmed the airline's strengths and exposed areas requiring urgent attention. Olivia worked tirelessly with the development team to refine the system, ensuring the feedback was actionable. When the app rolled out company-wide, its impact was immediate. Passengers appreciated being heard, and staff found new clarity in understanding their roles in the passenger experience. For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much. Ellie's workshops became the soul of the reform effort. Her ability to weave her decades of experience into relatable lessons transformed mandatory training into moments of inspiration. She didn't lecture, she shared, her words resonating with authenticity. During one session, she recounted a memory that silenced the room. "I remember a passenger once asking me why I was allowed to wear this uniform," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the memory. "I carried that question for years, doubting myself. But I stand here today to tell you this. Belonging isn't about permission, it's about conviction." Her audience, often a mix of seasoned employees and new hires, left her sessions visibly moved, many staying behind to thank her personally or share their own experiences. Among those attending Ellie's workshops was Brenda. At first, she kept to the back, her presence tentative, but as the weeks passed, she began to participate more openly, sharing her journey with humility and candor. "I thought I knew what professionalism meant," she admitted during one session, her voice low but steady. But I realized it's not just about doing your job. It's about how you treat people while doing it. Her words resonated deeply, sparking a conversation that extended beyond the session's end. Over time, Brenda's transformation became evident not just in her words, but in her actions. She volunteered for new initiatives, mentored younger staff, and quietly rebuilt relationships with colleagues who had once doubted her sincerity. Outside legacy airlines, the reforms were gaining attention. Industry leaders noted the airline's initiatives, with some quietly adopting similar measures. Olivia found herself thrust into the spotlight, invited to speak at conferences and forums where her insights into inclusivity and systemic change were eagerly sought. Though public speaking was never her goal, she accepted the invitations with the same calm determination that had carried her through the initial incident. In one particularly poignant keynote address, she said, "Change starts with small, consistent actions. It's not about grand gestures. It's about the courage to do the right thing day after day." Ellie joined her on many of these occasions, their partnership becoming a symbol of what the airline stood for, honoring its past while embracing its future. Together, they fielded questions, shared anecdotes, and inspired audiences to consider their own roles in creating inclusive environments. Ellie often reminded them, progress doesn't sustain itself. It needs people. People willing to reflect, to act, and to keep moving forward, even when it's hard. Harrison Hayes, watching from Legacy's headquarters, felt both pride and resolve. While the airline had made significant strides, he knew the journey was far from over. There were still critics, both internal and external, who viewed the reforms as excessive or performative. Mr. Hayes faced these challenges head-on, often speaking about the importance of building a lasting legacy. "Change isn't about addressing one moment," he said in an interview. "It's about ensuring that every passenger and every employee feels valued every single day." The culmination of these efforts was the first annual Legacy Day, a company-wide event celebrating progress and reaffirming the airline's commitment to inclusivity and respect. The atmosphere in the converted hangar was electric, a mix of pride, reflection, and hope. Employees mingled with passengers and community leaders, sharing stories of growth and connection. Olivia and Ellie stood at the forefront alongside Mr. Hayes, ready to address the crowd. Olivia spoke first, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today isn't just about looking back at what we've done," she said. "It's about looking forward to what we can become. Change is hard. It requires humility, patience, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it's worth it, because every step forward brings us closer to a world where everyone feels seen and valued." The applause was immediate and heartfelt. When Ellie took the microphone, her presence commanded the room. "We're not done," she said, her tone both firm and hopeful. "What we've built here is a foundation. It's up to all of us to keep building, to keep growing, and to ensure that this isn't just a moment, but a movement." As the applause swelled, Brenda stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. She hadn't planned to speak, but when Mr. Hayes gestured for her to join them on stage, she hesitated only briefly before stepping forward. The murmurs in the crowd stilled as she took her place beside Olivia and Ellie. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied herself, meeting the eyes of the audience. "I made mistakes," she began, her tone raw but resolute, "and for a long time I let those mistakes define me. But I've learned that our mistakes aren't the end of our story. They're just the beginning of how we choose to make things right. Today I stand here not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone committed to being better every single day." The applause started slowly, but built into a standing ovation, the crowd recognizing not just her courage, but the journey she had undertaken. As Brenda stepped back, Olivia and Ellie greeted her with warm smiles, their support palpable. The day ended with the three women standing together at the edge of the hangar, the hum of conversations and laughter filling the space around them. They didn't need to speak. The shared understanding between them was enough. Olivia, the catalyst. Ellie, the bridge. Brenda, the learner. Together they represented not just the past and present of Legacy Airlines, but its future. A future built on progress, unity, and hope. This was not just the new standard, it was the beginning of something far greater. The Legacy Airlines' 60th anniversary gala was nothing short of magnificent. The sprawling event hall, adorned with shimmering lights and elegant decorations, was filled with employees, industry leaders, and community members. Each detail, from the archival photos displayed along the walls to the banners highlighting the company's achievements, told a story of progress and perseverance. For Olivia Reynolds, stepping into the room felt surreal. She had never imagined that one flight, one moment of standing her ground, could lead to this. As the evening unfolded, the air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Guests mingled, sharing stories of growth and transformation. Olivia moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence, exchanging smiles and handshakes with colleagues and strangers alike. She paused at a display highlighting the airline's recent initiatives. Her name featured prominently among the contributors. A wave of pride washed over her, tempered by the humility of knowing how many hands had worked to bring these changes to life. At the center of the room, a stage stood ready, illuminated by soft, warm lights. As the program began, Harrison Hayes took the podium, his voice carried easily over the crowd, calm and commanding as always. 60 years ago, he began, Legacy Airlines was founded with the promise of connecting people, of bringing the world closer together. Today we reaffirm that promise, not just through the routes we fly, but through the values we uphold. He spoke of the journey they had undertaken, the challenges faced, and the victories won, setting the tone for an evening of celebration and reflection. When Olivia's name was called, a ripple of applause spread through the room. She stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Facing the crowd, she took a moment to gather her thoughts. "A year ago," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her, "I was just a passenger on a flight. I didn't set out to change anything. I simply wanted to be treated with respect. But what I've learned since then is that even the smallest moments can spark something much bigger. Change doesn't come easy, but it starts with us. With every choice we make, every step we take, we can create a better world." Her words hung in the air, met with a standing ovation. Olivia stepped back, her gaze sweeping over the faces. Among them she saw Ellie Porter, her mentor and anchor throughout this journey, clapping with quiet pride. "For you, a free like is easy, but for me, it is the greatest support and encouragement. For this video, can you give me 1 like and 1 subscription? Thank you very much." Ellie joined her on stage moments later, her presence as commanding as ever. She took the microphone, her warm smile setting the room at ease. "When I first joined this industry," she began, "the idea of an event like this, celebrating progress and inclusion, would have been unimaginable. But here we are, proof that change is not just possible, it's inevitable if we work for it. Tonight, we celebrate not just the milestones we've reached, but the journey that brought us here. And let me remind you, the journey is far from over." The applause was thunderous, a testament to the respect and admiration Ellie had earned over her decades of service. As she stepped aside, she motioned for Brenda Miller to join them. There was a brief pause, a moment of tension, as Brenda approached the stage. Her steps were deliberate, her expression one of quiet resolve. When she reached the microphone, the room fell silent. "I wasn't sure if I belonged here tonight," Brenda began, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her tone. "For a long time, I let my mistakes define me. I thought they were the end of my story. But thanks to the people in this room, people who believed in change, in second chances, I realized that mistakes aren't the end. They're the beginning of something new. if we let them be." Her words struck a chord, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. The applause that followed was slow at first, then grew into a wave of encouragement and acceptance. Brenda stepped back, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and was met with warm smiles from both Olivia and Ellie. The night continued, filled with stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Olivia found herself at the edge of the room, watching as employees and guests mingled, sharing their hopes for the future. Ellie joined her, a glass of champagne in hand. "It's quite the sight, isn't it?" Ellie said, her voice soft but filled with pride. Olivia nodded. "It is. And to think it all started on one flight." Ellie chuckled, her gaze distant, as if recalling the weight of that day. Sometimes the smallest sparks light the biggest fires. As the evening drew to a close, the three women, Olivia, Ellie, and Brenda, found themselves standing together. The noise of the gala faded into the background as they shared a quiet moment. No words were necessary. The shared understanding between them was enough. Olivia, the catalyst who had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Ellie, the bridge connecting generations and guiding the way forward. Brenda, the learner who had faced her flaws and emerged stronger. Together, they embodied the journey of legacy airlines, a journey of progress, redemption, and hope. This was not just the new standard, it was the beginning of something far greater. The final speech of the night came from Mr. Hayes, who returned to the stage to close the evening. "Legacy Airlines has always been about connecting people," he said, his voice firm yet warm. "Tonight, we celebrate not just what we've built, but who we've become. And as we look to the future, let us remember that every connection we make, every action we take, is part of a larger story, a story that we write together." The applause that followed was a mix of pride and hope, the sound carrying far beyond the walls of the event hall as the guests began to disperse. Olivia, Ellie, and Brenda, taking in the moment, the journey that had brought them here was not without its challenges, but it was one they wouldn't trade for anything. Together they walked out into the night, ready to face whatever came next, for this was not an ending, but a continuation, one that promised a brighter future for everyone. Olivia, Ellie, and Brenda walked out of the hangar together, leaving behind the celebration of Legacy Airlines' transformation. But their departure wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a ripple effect, a legacy of change they had ignited in the industry and beyond. Olivia Reynolds' story became more than a moment of personal triumph. It evolved into a movement, a powerful reminder that change starts with individuals but thrives through collective action. Olivia's journey reminds us that progress begins with courage, compassion, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. If you were in Olivia's shoes, how would you respond to injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like and share this story to inspire others, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling tales of resilience, justice, and hope. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.